Hello, everybody. Welcome to the third session of this webinar series of Rethinking Security. Today, we'll be joined by Richard Reeve from Rethinking Security, Josephine Dresner from Minds Advisory Group, and Joseph Maila from ESSEC Irene Center for Negotiation. We're just waiting on the last two panelists, Josephine and Joseph. We see that they are having a little bit of technical problems. I just ask for a little bit of patience, just a couple of minutes, see if they can join us as well.
So firstly, I would like to thank Sonny and Paul for making this session possible. And I would like to welcome everyone to our session concerning security decision makers. The guiding question for our discussion will be, who rules? This session is a part of a broader reflection on security in Europe approach from a peace-oriented and plural perspective. Today, we are joined by Richard Reeve, coordinator of Rethinking Security, and later on, Josephine Dresner, director of policy and strategic partnerships at Minds Advisory Group, and Joseph Maila, professor of geopolitics and international mediation at ESSEC Business School. Now, let me briefly explain how the session will work. We'll have a first round of interventions, then a dialogue between the speakers mediated by myself. And after that, we'll open for some questions on the audience. And at the final minutes, I will offer some closing remarks and therefore end the session. So now, I would like to address the following question. So who makes security decisions? Formally, informally, and operationally? Richard, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Lucas, and thanks for inviting me, and thanks to everyone who's joining this from hopefully all over Europe. I want to talk really about both who makes security decisions and, in many ways, more importantly, who doesn't make security decisions, who's excluded from the decision-making on these very important and very expensive decisions that affect all our lives. And I'll be drawing mostly from the experience in my country. I'm based in the UK. Rethinking Security is a network of organizations that works to critically engage with security policy, specifically here in the United Kingdom, as well as working in sort of coalition with some other like-minded organizations across Europe, and as far as Australia, that seek to do similar things in their countries. I think we need to address security as both a difficult to define concept and as what might be called a black box concept. So by black box, I mean, we know something's happening. We know it's happening somewhere else, but we don't have any transparency, any light to shine onto the policymaking process in many ways. It's happening somewhere else, by somebody else, on our behalf, supposedly, but essentially it's an opaque system. Now, why is that? Sometimes there are good reasons. I mean, operational security aspects of sort of military security obviously thrives on secrecy and being not open to one's enemies. But that's just a small sector of what I think security really means, and has been used to obscure greater public participation, greater public accountability over security decision making. So in some ways, to answer the question, we have to broadly define what security means. Does it mean sort of national security in a sometimes called hard or military sense of defending the state and the territory? Or is it something much broader than that in what we might call human security? Is it looking after our well-being? Is it looking after our ecological well-being, our social well-being, our economic well-being, all these factors that weigh on our quality of life, which we may call security? And of course, in most senses, most contexts, who decides what kind of security is going to be upheld for us is quite a limited thing. Very rarely is society asked, what does security mean to you? What do you value? What would you prioritize? This is something we've asked in our own networks and our own approach to security through our alternative security review here in the UK, and our suggestions on methodologies of how government can do this differently. But frankly, I would suggest that for the most part, government's not particularly interested in having a broader conversation about security. Politicians are the ones who ultimately decide what ought to be the frames of reference, what to be the policy on security. But for the most part, they feel, I think, quite weak, quite not up to the task, quite uncertain about defining these kind of issues, and tend to defer to people who've made their career in the might call a national security state, securocrats, which is a problem for accountability. It's a problem for getting the kind of security policy that really reflects on priorities of people. I would suggest thinking about how governments do national security reviews, because almost all governments now do periodic reviews, strategies around security, usually called national security strategies, sometimes security and defense reviews, these kind of things. Almost all do them every 5 years or so. In the UK, we've been doing them every 2 years. The reason we do them every 2 years is because the government gets them wrong every time, and they're found to be not up to the next challenge that comes along, either because they haven't predicted it, because they haven't got the resources to devote to things, because the government change, all kinds of reasons. I think if they were more open processes that they were more confident about, they probably would last longer, even in a turbulent context like our own. But I want to suggest these 6 ways in which security reviews are used not to include people, but to exclude people from security. So the first one is that governments define the terms of reference for security reviews, or they don't. Sometimes there are no public terms of reference. This was the case in the UK for our last review last year. So we never found out what they were trying to achieve with the security review. But usually there are terms of reference set by the Prime Minister here or somebody senior in government. Very often they exclude the really important or controversial aspects of security. So if we look at the UK Security and Defence Review of last year, quite a complex process. But it started with a TOR that excluded our main alliance with the US or with NATO. It excluded a consideration of nuclear weapons, which takes up a huge share of our defense budget, and it's obviously ethical and legal issues. It wasn't going to consider the AUKUS nuclear submarine program with the US and Australia, which is a massive thing. So most of the really big issues were not on the table in the first place. Secondly, is who actually is doing the reviewing? Who are the reviewers? Who sets the strategy? And in almost all contexts, they're going to be insiders, people who are trusted not to rock the boat, not to challenge the status quo. We think about who did the reviews in this country last year. They were people who, for example, had been Secretary General of NATO, who had worked in the Trump administration, who had been very senior in the army, or who were a prominent historian of transatlantic relations. So all of them were really invested in transatlantic relations with the United States. We're never going to look seriously at that issue, even if it were within the terms of reference. Thirdly, and really importantly, is public consultation. So people ought to be at the center of security strategy. We ought to be asking people what they value. But time and again, people are effectively excluded. So there was zero public consultation in our last review in this country. Going back, there were slightly more open processes, favoring of certain kinds of expertise, of insiders, certain universities or think tanks in the country. Certainly not really encouraging very much critical engagement with the process. Certainly in this country, that process of consultation has become more and more closed, more and more opaque over time, effectively excluding people compared to insider expertise. Fourthly, often security strategies don't set objectives or outcomes. So it's not clear what they're trying to achieve, which makes monitoring and evaluating them very difficult. They ought to have a sort of clear monitoring, evaluation, learning framework attached to them. So every year you can look at how they're doing and check against it. That effectively doesn't happen. So they're marking their own homework. Finally, in terms of the fifth and sixth, is really about who scrutinizes this process from outside. Now, if it's not people, maybe it should be the media and it should be Parliament. What we effectively find in this country, in the UK, is that the media is very tame. It doesn't ask questions that it knows the Ministry of Defence or the Prime Minister doesn't want to answer on security, because it knows it won't get invited to insider briefings if it does, or we use what's called a D-notice, which is effectively a form of censorship to let the media know what questions they may not ask. And then there's a question, finally, of parliamentary scrutiny. We have various select committees in the UK, in the House of Commons and the House of Lords, that can look into these things. But again, their powers are quite limited. Their membership is usually selected from those with quite insider experience, often former military or security personnel or insiders. So really there's a very closed group of people who are doing these reviews and quite limited opportunities to scrutinize them and hold them accountable. But I'll stop there and hopefully pick up on some things later. Thanks.
Thank you, Richard. I would now like to yield to Josephine. Do you hear from her? Well, I think she has connection issues. So
Yes,
Richard, if you
she managed to enter, but it says that it kicked her out. I'm sorry because some participants are having issues entering the webinar. We're trying to work on it right now. Just kindly follow with the next question to Richard and see if we can make Josephine enter.
Okay, perfect. So Richard, while we talked about this process of the decision making, the groups are excluded from this policy process. I think now we can move to a crucial follow-up, which is how does decisions translate into real outcomes in conflict environments? You to you.
I think there's a truism that no good defense or security strategy survives contact with the enemy, in a sense. So I think what we have to understand by kind of security strategies is that they are a form of public messaging, where the government authorities try to answer some questions of their own making and to set a narrative about security that they want to convey to the general public. So at times that'll be talking about country's place in the world, talk about a range of issues, or it would be, as we've seen recently, talking more specifically about military threats, such as to the UK from Russia, as our recent strategies have been about. In terms of sort of conflict countries, if your question is about kind of dealing with more classically kind of conflict affected or fragile countries like in say Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa or the Middle East, effectively they've been quite written out in recent strategies, and the government has had to develop other often very ad hoc approaches to those conflicts. If we look at sort of internal issues, you get a lot of decision making that happens sort of ad hoc or on the fly, as we would say. And I'm thinking, for example, of government approach to protest. So the protest is a fundamental right in most democracies. In an unhappy society or polity, as I think many in Europe have become over recent years, increasingly, that power is being used against segments of society that the government feels threatened by. So if you look, for example, in the UK, we've seen a lot of legislative action against protest, particularly against people protesting against genocide in Palestine, the actions of the Israeli government. We've seen prescription of groups as terrorist actors and prosecution of hundreds, if not thousands, of people for supporting those groups, which really kind of points to the lack of accountability in security policy making, and how once you've declared something to be a security issue or a terrorism issue, the level of scrutiny that it's subject to becomes much less than other kinds of issues.
Okay, so I would like to address a final question about what does this fragmentation in security decision making mean for democratic accountability and human security? Richard?
Thanks. I see Joseph has now joined us as well. I wouldn't really see it as fragmentation as such. I think actually what we're seeing is a centralization of decision making on security. Certainly in the UK, certainly in the United States, within the European Union, it's a little more fragmented, I suppose, or polycentric. But certainly in the UK, we're seeing a centralization of security policy making and a movement away from human security towards national security, and a clear narrative that human security is not the kind of approach to security that the government thinks is now appropriate, either as they talk about security or as they resource security. So we've of course seen huge cuts in our international development assistance budget and transfer that to the military budget. We have a conflict in a way between increasing military spending and maintaining other forms of spending. We have a discussion about resilience and what that means, or rather, we don't have a discussion really. We're supposed to have a national conversation about defense, security, and resilience, which we keep not having because I think the government is running scared of public opinion on these issues. Rather, we have conflicting areas of policy. It's a fragmented policy, but the conversation is trying to trying to be centralized with the government so that the discontents of society are not really heard by government.
Perfect, Richard. I'll now like to hear from you, Joseph, please.
Hello, everybody. I'm sorry, I tried to connect, but I don't know what happened. Where did we arrive? At which question shall I be answering? I don't know exactly. Please
Okay.
reset me
Sorry.
in some way.
Yeah.
We were talking about the decision-making process and about security.
Yeah. We're talking about a process of fragmentation in security decision-making and what would it mean for democratic accountability and human security.
Yes, but let me first set the framework. We are talking about the decision-making in the fields of security and foreign policy making, especially related to defense areas and issues within Europe. And what strikes me, but I'm going to speak from the point of view of the European Union and not from the point of view of the cities, of the states. What strikes me is that when we talk about the security policy and the defense policy within the European Union, the case is that it was always under pressure and through wars that things have happened to advance and to be really formulated. Let me think about one issue. The whole security policy of the European Union began at one point in the 90s when we were, as states, European states, when we were confronted to the wars that were going on in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And at that point, we made it clear that we have to have a policy. And we have provided for that within the Maastricht Treaty. So it was under pressure that we put this. The second point was in the aftermath of the terrorist attack in Madrid, 2004, we have come to think about a policy of countering terrorism. And from the point of view of what's happening today in Ukraine, it is really when we were talking about an invasion made by the Russian in Ukraine that we have begun to speak about an autonomous policy for the European Union in order to confront what was happening in Ukraine at the fringes of Europe. It means what? It means that one thing, that we are confronted from on the one hand, with the policy decision making within our states. And it is a policy, when I come to speak about France, for example, it is highly centralized, okay? Even you don't have to go to parliament in order to discuss your security. We went, for example, as the French state to Mali for security purposes. I'm talking about really countries that matter for the European Union and Africa, without even going to the parliament, okay? So we were able to take the decision because we are a very centralized state. This is not the case, of course, in other countries. So when you talk about fragmented decision-making, I don't quite really agree about that. The decision-making processes within Europe are so different that we cannot unify the whole thing in saying, well, it's about democracy. No, it is not about democracy. I mean, when Parliament is not able to discuss the foreign policy that you are conducting, when you are waging a war without having the Parliament being put within the larger framework of a parliamentary decision. So it is very interesting when it comes to Europe to think that even if you have to have a policy, a foreign policy in order, shaped within the EU is so far away from the democratic concerns of the people of the European Union that the answer always came by saying, well, this is discussed in Brussels. I'm not, as if everything is going, as if Brussels were in another on another planet. I mean, as if the supplementary policy that is shaped by Brussels has nothing to do with the internal policy decision making within the one country, Italy, France, and Spain, and things like that. So, two things. On the one point, the fantastic diversity of political decision making process within the state, and the far away decision making process that is held in Brussels, far away from the eyes, if I might say, of the people of the Union, of the European Union states. So for me, it is quite a very specific decision making in the area of foreign policy. It is typical from a country that is linked still by national interest and at the same time is part of a confederation in which you can share areas of concern and keep for you, for yourself, national interest concerns in which Brussels, for example, has nothing to say and nothing to do. Am I answering the point that you have raised? Sorry, I'm taking the whole discussion
Yeah, no
a little
worries,
bit late.
No problem. Now that you could get here, I can ask you the previous questions that I did to Richard.
Which was what?
We can go back to that. We were talking about firstly about the decision making, and the second question I did to Richard was, how does decision making translate into real outcomes in conflict and conflict environments?
Are you talking about the way the decisions that the EU is taking are being implemented on sort of outcome policies?
Yeah, perfect.
I'm not sure to answer the good question, but still, I think that the European Union foreign policy is very specific. It is not quite autonomous. It has to be conducted with other partners. European foreign policy is a policy that is made with partners. For example, if you want to go in a defense and security policy on the ground, okay, operation for keeping peacekeeping, for example. So you have to go through NATO, for example. Okay, so the European Union was very much in the very beginning, at the very start of it, has a very specific links with the UN and with the NATO in order to conduct operations abroad. And it is still, because I was just listening to the former panelist who was talking about the human security. Europe is about human security. All the issues, the values that we cherished or that are being promoted within the European Union, talking about the non-violence, the settlement of conflict peacefully, the way of conducting inclusive peace process in order to bring about the peace in countries that are torn about by war. All these values are very specifically being the human security goals. And if you go back to the UN 2030 human security values that are trying to be implemented within the broader policy of the UN, well, you find that it is totally in accordance with the philosophy of the European Union, I might say. But when you come to implement this policy, you cannot do it alone. You have to go through partnership with NATO in order to have a strong foreign policy, training, for example, of the people of the military of Ukraine. You have to have a partnership with African countries in order to do what you want to do in order translate into outcomes your foreign policy or your policy of security and defense. For example, if you want to do to secure the Red Sea region or the Hormuz Strait region, you have to go through a like-minded policy making or policy group within Europe. For example, when we went in order to fight piracy in Somalia or in the Red Sea region, France has this agreement being held with Spain, and we have shaped a policy that was the Atalante policy in order to bring peace in the. So the paradox is that we have good values, we have specific goals, we have goals that are really defined in a very specific way, but we are not very strong in shaping policies. We are not autonomous in policies. We are autonomous when it comes to our values, the values that we cherish, and we want to be to see them implemented in the foreign policy area or arena. So this is the contradiction within the European Union. And the end of it is that it was very much is striking. For example, when you have a policy concerning Palestine or Gaza, okay, you have it within the European Union. You pay for the Palestinian Authority, for example, but you are excluded from the peace process. You have a very strong policy backing the Ukraine government, but at the same time you are excluded from the policy, the negotiations that are going on between the U.S. And you have a very strong policy concerning Lebanon. You participate with the United States to UNIFIL. And at the same time, when you are discussing, and they are discussing nowadays, a ceasefire process in Lebanon, Europe is completely out of the picture. So this is the problem. You are not autonomous when it comes to your means and the tools that you have to have in order to have a strong foreign policy. And at the same time, you can discuss, of course, of being partner of such and such state, but without having an access to the policy making or to decision making on the ground and participate to the solution that are set up or set forward in so many countries and in so many conflict cases.
Thank you, Professor. It cleared a lot.
I'm not sure to pinpoint exactly the question, but I'm trying to catch up.
Yeah. But it was great. It was great. So now that we ended our questions time between you
it
two,
is the end.
No. Now I have the questions from the audience, and with that, I would like you to Sonia, and I would like to ask the audience to make some brief questions so we can hear from more voices. I think Sonia and Paul may be having some connection issues, so I'll just read the questions from the chat to both of you. So here I see the first question from Dirbail O'Callaghan. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it. So it's a question for Richard. Thank you very much for your presentation. The EU is currently elaborating a new security strategy. The process also seems to exclude any public or civil society consultation. What does the EU risk by rushing through a new security strategy?
Thanks, Dervla. I think Joseph has kind of addressed this question in his last comments, I think, about the difficulty of security policy making in the EU context, particularly in terms of the resources and the delivery aspect of it being quite separate from the sort of moral and normative direction that the EU is able to set. I think in some ways that the fact that the policy is essentially values based and is normative is quite a good argument for bringing people in. Security policymakers are, I think, most resistant to public participation in security because they think, it's technical. You wouldn't understand about deterrence theory or force postures and all kinds of levers of state, intelligence, how these things fit together. But the normative is quite different. In fact, the normative should set all the parameters for how the other levers are utilized or how strategy is set. So then the EU stands to lose quite a lot by not really involving people in civil society in this. It's as a normative actor, as a values-based institution, that's kind of where the EU is, where it can set its parameters. And if those parameters then, come into conflict with something like NATO, which is much less democratic, but also has its own strategic concepts, which includes a lot of stuff on values, then the EU is possibly well positioned to push back on where policy would not live up to its own values or norms. To give one example, occurred to me, all countries in Europe have done all kinds of work on their defense strategies and policies. But ultimately, with the exception of Ireland and Malta and Cyprus and Austria, they all had their resourcing set by the United States at the NATO summit last year. Trump said you must spend at least 3.5% on defense, 5% on security and defense.
Yes.
And that was a very undemocratic, a very external diktat on the parameters of security policy and resourcing that pretty much all of Europe is living with. Again, with the exception of Spain, who's explicitly pushed back on that.
So we have a couple of questions in Catalan from Jordi Costa. Basically, just to resume them a little bit and to momentarily translate them, isn't the security decision befallen on citizens, or citizenship? Why it isn't like that? How to take it back? Through political parties, through representativeness in the European Union or in local countries, and also the fight of non-violence. The state could have a section of non-violent voluntaries that could link with a more wider network of non-violent citizenry. And also how to lessen or to pacify the military power, how to soften it, how to make this hard military power softer or introduce more constructive approaches to the military. Thank you.
Who is going to answer the questions? The many questions in one question. Okay.
Go ahead, Joseph.
Oh, you want to go?
No, you go ahead. I'll follow.
No, I have a very quick answer. When you go to a conflict, you have three layers, which are the most important ones that contribute to, to the fighting going on and on. And when you have an operation that it is very complicated or complex, when you have at the one hand the military and you're trying to soften them, sir, but I really don't know how to soften the military power when it comes to being, mandated in order to keep peacekeeping in some areas in which conflicts are going on and on. What you can do, on the other hand, I don't know much about the military power, which is under a mandate when you go to real case conflicts. But you have two other tools that you can really work on, which are really the human security goals. The first one, when you go to a country that is really undergoing a tremendous or terrible conflict, the first thing is to ensure and provide the livelihoods, okay, and ensure that a kind of development of a new economy can restart. Okay, this you have the civil society, that the NGOs that might come and help in order to tackle the conflict from another point of view, which is not the point of view of forcing or resorting to force in order to impose a solution on the other people. And the second thing is the human rights and the human dignity level on which you can work. And here comes the tools, the many approaches of a non-violent approaches concerning, aiming at solving the problem. Here, the civil society from many countries, the NGOs also, can contribute in order to soften not the military power, which is, from my point of view, impossible, but to introduce a new kind of mindset that has to say that you have to go to an inclusive process, that you have to talk with your so-called enemy, quote unquote, and you have to be very much focusing on the role of the youth, of the women in solving the conflict. So you have to make a clear-cut distinction. On the one hand, you have the military process, or the process that is trying to impose a kind of peace, momentary peace. And on the other hand, you have this peace, the election, to prepare to new elections, to make the civil society come to term. This is very important. And here is the role of the NGOs and all the cultural dimensions of solving a conflict. You cannot solve it just by resorting to force, but you have to couple this with an approach that we are very much familiar with. But to be really, to address the real cases and the real what's happening on the ground, it is very, very difficult to make people abandon the idea that they can renounce force. Here you have a race that you have to win between resorting to violence and at the same time trying to implement or to have some new values being and entering in the society. Look, for example, at the Bosnia-Herzegovina case. We have been able to settle a kind of peace in this country, but at the same time, forces, the European forces, the United Nations operating under a UN mandate are still there, but the mentality has not changed.
Yeah.
They have everything. They have the livelihoods provided for them, many initiatives on the ground in order to push for a development, human rights and dignity, of course. But it is because the policy, the military policy is still on the ground, and policemen and soldiers are all around. And at the same time, mentality has not come to change.
Thank you, Joseph. I don't know, apologies, because it's been such a nightmare behind the scenes. Both Josephine and myself have not been able whatsoever to join the sessions with our users. So apologies to everyone for missing, especially Josephine.
I faced the same problem.
I know.
Difficulties and all
Anyway,
that.
we still have some minutes. So I don't know if Richard would like to answer to that same question, or should we jump to the other questions that we have?
I'm eager to listen to Richard, if I may.
Sure. Then Richard, please.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, on the question of softening military power, I'd agree with Joseph that fundamentally armed violence is armed violence, and it's the militaries are in the business of dealing with lethality, and that's not a soft thing. That said, there has been a lot of attention in recent decades, years, on rules of engagement and accountability, whether that's like counting civilians killed in conflict or the rules of how force is used. What's troubling now is there's a lot of pushback on that. And certainly you see that in the United States and all kinds of things that come out of Pete Hegseth's mouth in terms of a warrior culture, and not talking about gender or inclusivity or human rights or international law. These are really important principles which are being relaxed in dangerous ways, and I'm seeing that in the UK just in the last year or so. First, I hear the Ministry of Defence ministers refusing to talk about gender or women, peace and security, and they say they're fully committed to the women, peace and security agenda, but they're not going to say gender. They're not going to talk about certain concepts. Why? Because the Americans don't like it? Because they're uncomfortable with it? Probably. Just this week, I hear them saying that they're trying to change the way that service personnel, the military, think about killing civilians. Not to be more concerned about killing civilians, but to be less concerned about killing civilians, because they think the rules of engagement in which they fought in Afghanistan and Iraq in the last 20 years are inappropriate for the kind of conflict they're preparing for with Russia. It's scary stuff. It's going in the opposite direction to what we might be talking about in terms of human security. And likewise, the human security embedded in this sustainable development goals that Joseph mentioned is mostly being abandoned to spend on militarization and preparation for war. We have to push back on these things. How can we do that? Yes, as civil society, but fundamentally has to come through politics. Political parties have to be willing to challenge on these things. That's only just begun to happen in the UK. I know in most European countries, there's more of a spectrum of political actors willing to challenge things. But
Richard, do you think that political parties are so much aware about what's happening in order that they have not a say, they have always a say to say on conflicts, but to be very effective on the ground? Political parties for me is the civil society when it comes to conflict that are taking place abroad. It is civil society for the many people abroad. When you see a political party responsible coming and discussing and saying what he has to say, well, for most of the people, it's not a soldier. He's not a representative of the military. He can speak as being a man coming from the UK, from Spain, from Ireland.
Sorry, I'm going to have to ask because we have some more questions and I would like everyone to get their chance to answer to us. So we have Hara, who was our rapporteur from last week. She says, from last session, we discussed that security is constructed through language. Through that lens, do politicians and military actors construct it in the same way? or do they operate with different realities that lead to fragmented policies and fragmented implementation? This question is going to be for both of you. And then we have two more, but let me just take this one. And then if you could answer in a little shorter way, then we can get the other two questions. Thank you.
Richard, go ahead, because I'm not sure to be completely in accordance with the fragmented language, the session that you have already once upon a time. I don't know when.
Last week, Joseph. But that doesn't change what we had last week. It's just she's asking if politicians and military actors construct language in that fragmented way, or do they operate with realities?
I think the language we use about security sets the policy in many ways. So if security is a word that is like, if we see it as something we can't touch, it becomes an opaque, unaccountable issue. If we see security as a well-being, as something innate to each of us, my security matters, your security matters, Joseph's security matters in France, and those security is interrelated, then we are the subjects of security, right? It's not something the state, the nation, the national interest. People use the national interest as something as if it's a fixed concept that nobody can challenge. And we don't have to define it. It's obvious, the national interest. We're protecting it. So we have to interrogate those things. The nation is us. We are the nation, the people. We the people. Security is my security. It is our people's security. It is our community security. Yes, it is our nation's state security, and it is our continent's security and our planet's security.
So thank you. I don't know if Joseph, do you want to answer this one or?
Very quickly.
Yes, sure.
I think that there is quite a different, the soldier cannot speak like the diplomat, who cannot speak like the civil society. When you have to discuss with the policy or military policy being implemented on the ground, the most important concern of the people in charge of keeping the peace in some part of the world is your physical security. So are they going to have wordings that will fit with the physical security means and tools? And when you have people coming from the NGOs or from the civil society in a very broad way, they're talking about the well-being of people. I mean, the well-being of people is not only food and Medicare and things like that. It is also about being a set mind of peace and discussing in a peaceful way and trying to implement things through electoral processes, for example.
Yes.
So what is the missing link? The missing link is the political wording. Okay? You cannot make quite a divorce between the way the soldier is going to speak in terms of physical security and the wordings of a man who's come from Médecins Sans Frontières or all the NGOs concerned with peace, and they're going to speak about the well-being of population. You have to have that. And I agree with Richard that here the civil society, the worldly civil society, if I might say, I know that the word civil society does not exist, but we have to be partners on trying to set terms of a broader policy making that encompasses both the physical security and the well-being security. But I don't know who is able to do that. You have to have cooperation on the ground between the so many actors that are playing an important role in order to bring about peace.
Thank you. Let me read the two last questions, and then you answer however you can, and then we have to listen to the rapporteur's conclusions. So first question is from Mr. O'Callaghan and says, question to Joseph. You mentioned that EU citizens are far removed from decision-making in Brussels. However, at the minute, the EU is heavily pushing Eurobarometer data to justify rearmament, boosting industrial defense capacity, etc. Do you think they are asking the right questions of citizens, or are they overlooking human security aspects? And then one question for both of you from Ms. Iriondo. What effect do big corporations lobbying for deregulation at the EU level have on security in Europe? Maybe, Joseph, do you want to start?
Yes, very, very quickly. I agree with the gentleman or the lady that has put the first question.
The first one was a gentleman, the second one a lady.
No,
yes.
lady as well.
Okay. Lady also, sorry.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, no, this is not the point. The point is that we are today faced with such a turbulent situation in the world that you cannot escape speaking about how to resist, how to defend yourselves. The main concern of all the European countries is increasing the budget, the military budget, the budget of the defense forces whatsoever, in terms of creating more, having more tanks, more airplanes, more missiles. It's an awful time that we are going through, really. So you cannot tell to the people, well, let us talk about human security. It's not time. No, it is time to speak about how you're going to defend yourselves. You have to face reality in a very realpolitik way. How you, if I mean the Russians will continue their push, where are we going to be? So many threats that you have maybe talked about in your previous. So today we are in a kind of a dilemma. I don't like very much talking about geopolitics and realpolitik and how to defend ourselves and how to have more planes than the airplanes than the others, or more submarines or things like that. So we have to be very realistic in a way, try to solve our problems. And this is the responsibility of civil society. Civil society is not concerned only by the economic well-being, the social well-being, and things like that. It has to say something about the way we can. You used the term of disarming at one point. We have to push towards non-violence issues, non-violent approaches, civil society having a say concerning the military. Today the world is spending 2.4 trillion, 2.5 or 4 trillion dollars to spend on arms. And I heard Mr. Trump saying that the budget of the United States, which is already 1.2, is going to be 1.5 trillion. So quite 40% of the whole money that is being put in the military. So civil society has a very important role, not only in the well-being, but also to have a say in the political way of solving problems, and not resorting and thinking about going to violence in order to solve violent problems.
Thank you, Joseph. And I'm so sorry because Durbail, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name, O'Callaghan, she's a colleague from EPLO and she's a female colleague. Sorry for that. Richard, do you want to answer?
Yeah, just briefly on both. I mean, back to big corporations on lobbying, money talks in all forms of policy. And right now, a few things are as lucrative as military industries. You want an example? If you go to Westminster Tube metro station in London, the one outside the Houses of Parliament, when you go down the escalators to the platforms, you will always, every single time, whenever, always see a huge advert above you advertising BAE Systems, because that's their constituency and they have the money to do that. And that's just the public face of it. Obviously, lots of other things going on behind the scenes. Just on opinion polling and Eurobarometer information, I mean, this is something that we at Rethinking Security have done quite a lot of work on looking at how opinion polling frames attitudes towards security and what is possible. And of course, they use selected data and they frame questions very selectively. You know, you don't get asked what makes you feel secure. You're asked, are you most afraid of Russia or China?
Yeah.
So they're not asking you about the United States or anybody else, Spain or Turkey or Ireland, whoever it is. It's framed in a certain way. So that's how it is, and that's what we have to push back against. And we try and develop alternative methodologies for getting people to talk about security, to feel they are subject actors in security, and to be able to channel that, relate that to politicians, who are the people who set the narrative, which then defines how we do security and spend resources.
Thank you so much, Richard. Let me just take a few minutes, because at the beginning, we were so focused on trying to get Professor Maila and Josephine Dresner to the connection that we did not introduce or say anything. So we have prepared this cycle of webinars from ICIP, Institut Català Internacional per la Pau, together with several organizations all around Europe, that we contacted and got in touch through the EPLO. EPLO is the European Peace Liaison Officer that connects all or many organizations all around Europe working towards peace or related to the peace studies. Today, we had Richard Reeve from Rethinking Security in the UK and Professor Joseph Maila from ESSEC Business School and Irene. It's a really long name, Joseph.
Yes.
So we were also having Josephine Dresner, who was joining us from the Minds Advisory Group. The Minds Advisory Group have worked with us in 2 of the webinar sessions, and we are very sorry that in the end, connection could not work out, and we missed Josephine, who was really trying her best for like 45 minutes. We've tried all the ways possible. So thank you so much through all the organizations.
Is it a Germany-based organization?
Sorry?
It is a German-based organization from
No, Minds Advisory Group is in Brussels also, I think.
Manchester.
Yes. In Manchester, right? Yeah, thank you, Richard. We have this mess. So thank you for them. Now we're going to listen to Lucas. Also at the beginning, Paul didn't have the time to introduce because we were focused on the technical problems. Lucas is one of our students. He's studying political sciences. And here he did an Erasmus in Barcelona, if I'm not wrong, or he was studying actually in Barcelona. He's now in an Erasmus in Italy. For each session, we've been having a last year student, undergrad student, who is acting as a rapporteur. And at the end, they have to make their conclusions and final remarks. So Lucas, I'm yielding the floor to you.
Thank you, first of all, to you, Sonia, Paul, our panelists. I would like to start from where Richard was talking about, firstly, on the lack of participation and accountability inside the nation state. As we've seen security, our civilians seeing the security as a black box, a place they have no say, no action at all. So I believe that in European countries nationwide, they are not including its nationals on the discussion on the security matters. And even preparing in a lexical way this exclusion with its public messaging. A public messaging that is not clear, that not touches the civilians, it makes them further away from this process. And in another way, we not seen a fragmentation of security, but indeed seen a centralization of it, because we see the politician language keeping away other actors from participating on it. As politics should work as a filter between different actors to reach the civil society, it's working more as a block to it. And on the other hand, we can observe that the EU cannot address certain issues by themselves. As Professor Myla said, cooperation with NATO is a case. Cooperation of African countries another example. And overall, how even can the EU might be excluded from some peace discussion, such as in Gaza and in Ukraine? So we can conclude here there is in fact a double exclusion, a nation-based exclusion and an international exclusion. So to conclude, I believe this double exclusion should pass through a political filter, not this political block that was previously mentioned. The first step will be to a lexical change on politics, in a party-wise way. So we can then expand it to a more civil society participation, and then international-wise with the European Union. So with that, I would like to invite you all to participate to our next session on how is security provided, budget allocation, and instruments. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much to everyone. You now have in the chat the link to register for next week. We know we are changing the days every week because of availability of the speakers, but we really appreciate that on a Friday afternoon, so many people joined, and they seem to be very excited, and they really liked your conversation, Richard and Joseph. So thank you so, so much for joining us on a Friday. And see you next week on Thursday
the 20th.
for our fourth webinar of this cycle. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to everyone.
Adeu i moltes gràcies a tothom per connectar-vos, i gràcies també al nostre interpreter who has been translating into Catalan all our conversation in the parallel channel. Saps el nom del nostre intèrpret?
David.
Sí, el David. David, moltes gràcies per la interpretació que ha fet possible que la gent que ens seguia en català ens hagi pogut entendre.
Vale.
Merci. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a nice weekend all over Europe. See you next Thursday. Bye.
Bye.